Just pull it closer to you there. That'll do it. Okay. And it's fine to turn it around, please, when so the people are talking. Propositions. Context, which I've shown on the board with sort of C1, C2, city 1, city 2 is a context 1 and 2, and then A, B, C is coefficients of x1, x2, xn, like that. Or this should really be n. That is, A, B, and C may change if we're in China, or we're in France, or we're in North Dakota, and Y. So we're adding that with the big idea of the big C of context here. The second original thing about propositions is, and that's the normal class. That is, most philosophical, philosophy of science, sociology of science kinds of analyses we'll talk about. What is what is theory, and what's a good theory? And the classic answer is a deductive, interrelated set of propositions, and then they'll say, and the assumptions under which they hold. Okay, we don't say that. Instead of saying we make assumptions, that's the sort of classic example illustrated by economic theory. Classic ceteris paribus, if everything else equal, then markets will smoothly operate. We're trying to say instead, let's compare some markets which are more efficient or less efficient, and what are the factors which lead to greater or lesser efficiency in terms of that market, kind of the context. The context may be an institution, like having a stock market or not, and historically there weren't stock markets until relatively recent years. Or more generally to analyze where is there more competition, or where is there monopoly or monopolistic competition. Those are big theoretical factors in market analysis. Or if you look at, say, Marxist economics, then context is everything. Capitalism versus the agricultural feudal society, or socialism or communism. Those are the big contexts, you could say, as a simple example of what I'm talking about here. But instead of saying where everything is explained by communism or whatever, we'll say, let's look at maybe North Dakota versus Chicago. And why did you choose? Yeah, let me a follow-up question. When we said, which job would you take? In North Dakota, where you'd get paid twice as much or half as much in Chicago, and most of you said Chicago. But take the next step. You're the mayor of Chicago, or you're the mayor of Detroit, or mayor of New York, and anywhere else in the world, Shanghai. How much should you invest? Do your answers inform the decision which you were as a consultant in Shanghai or Paris or another city say, how much should you invest in amenities like bicycle paths, police, quarantine where people have serve you coffee and give you a chair to sit on or something like that. That is, how much should the city or the public goods, Samuelson's term, be included in the context, and how much should you invest in those amenities? All right, what is your answer? If we take your answer that most of you, if we take you folks who said, I'll take the $50,000 salary to be in Chicago, what does that tell us about what if you're mayor, you ought to be willing to spend for your citizens in terms of trying to be responsive to what the citizens have given us their information in the way you just answered it a couple of sessions back.
They value the amenities more than they value the marginal income gain that
More,
they
yeah, for sure, but how much more? If you're a policymaker and questions, how big is the budget? 10,000, 20,000, 30,000? Or none, or should we keep it at 50 because we won't, because of what?
You would want to increase that budget to attract more people, right, to your city, and in theory, it would be offset by like whatever tax revenue you would also get from bringing in those additional residents.
Yes, but how much? Think about it. Many people would say, especially they say the Chinese, where when this is almost none of the Chinese hear this. And I'm using China because it helps to answer this question. In China, it's a mixed economy, private and public, government and private. Nevertheless, it's much more heavily government-led, mandated at the same time that there is private entrepreneurship. The image simultaneously in the bigger context of China, it's still, until very recent years, it was a rural agricultural society. So there's massive amounts of migration to big cities, which has happened in Europe in the 19th century. It's happened in different places, you know. So I mean, America in 1900 was still something like 80% agricultural. Now it's, you know, less than 10%. If you've got more people who are migrating to cities, why are they migrating? Usually they say, oh, well, you'll get a better job, it's a better place to be, but why is it a better place to be, and how much more does that better job in terms of dollars and cents mean that it should attract them away from a rural area where they be paid nothing if they're working with a family in a family farm? And I'm using China as an extreme case, but this is classic all around the world. The Chicago economists will say the Chinese have the wrong answer, in the sense that people want to go to Beijing and Shanghai, but in fact, how much are they paid? And I've had a couple of PhD students here in economics from China dealing with, working with top PhD people, advisors in China who are the top people, and they get the wrong answer in terms of the I shouldn't say wrong. The Chicago theorists' hypothesis is wrong. Okay, how so and why? And what's the Chicago theorists' hypothesis? Let's say the big, if we for a moment will say ceteris paribus, we have a smoothly efficient market, supply and demand match up. Should people, or how much should the mayor of Chicago do if we have people who might want to migrate here from South Dakota? Isn't the normal, shouldn't, that is, if we were thinking like the Chinese or thinking like Americans in 1920, everybody would say, oh, you go to the city, you go to Detroit, you go to Chicago, you get a bigger salary, you get a better job. What is your answers are saying the opposite. You're saying, I'll stay in Chicago and I'll take half as much money to be in Chicago. What does that say, and why is this so critical, theoretically?
because I mean we value like the half of the salary we're not getting is like in value to the things we're getting in the cities, from like the amenities to the people we meet to what we can do.
Okay, exactly. That's the smooth, efficient economic answer. You're getting, in this example, $50,000 of amenities, which you're willing to pay to be here. You're taking that lowest salary. That's the opposite of what many people still say and talk about. But it's put differently. You can call it a non-intuitive answer, but it fits with good economic theory, and it's seen in the. I mean, economists here really, and so I'm building on this because in the book. Well, I mean, I've taught urban economics with George Tully, who's one of the leading founders of these studies of amenities, continued especially by Ed Glaser now at Harvard, but several others, Gary Becker and so forth. And so they really paid attention to these things thoughtfully of building a consistent theory. That's really what a consistent theory, top down, I'm showing you. And so then what are the assumptions which lead to this, and what are the consequences and so forth. So the theory is pretty clear. The empirical work on this by the economists is much more tricky, because they don't do, the economists in general don't do as much work as sociologists, some political scientists, or some of the ethnographers will talk to people in a grocery store and ask them questions which are data which may be a challenge. Okay, simple answer, at least 50,000, because we give it as a simple dichotomy. I mean, 100,000 versus 50. So it may be if we've asked the question, if you were paid 200,000 to go to North Dakota, and if most, we could even ask that. If you got paid 200,000, how many would you still stay in Chicago? Okay, then for you are now saying, let me ask that. Okay, you're assuming if you're not raising your hand, and then you're giving up, you're paying $150,000 in amenities, or the policy. I mean, it's a big decision. I mean, the fact that you're not reaching into your wallet to get out $150,000, you're doing the same thing from the standpoint of a mayor or an urban policy. We ought to invest a lot in these amenities, because we're keeping people here who are not going there, because we've got bicycle paths, because we've got continual supply of lakefront festivals. And I'm leading with John Boyer, Dean of the College, Mark Hansen, political scientist, historian, political science, me, sociologist, / social scientist. I'm not that wedded to sociology as some people, as you hear. The tour we're going to put on, the three of us, is on Saturday. So you can hear the three of us talking, arguing, disagreeing about these things as we look at different things in Chicago. Now, you have to register in advance, and it's at the Chicago Studies site where you can register. It's called Urban Bike, but as I looked for them, to my surprise, I mean, I started this about 20 years ago and did it alone for maybe 10 years, maybe 25 years, maybe 10 years or so alone. Then with other people like them. Now there are about 20 urban bike rides around Chicago. I mean, even on the next day, Sunday, there's something else. The last weekend, there's something. This is really taking off. As you bike around Chicago, there are bikes all over this city, which was not at all true. 10, 20, 30 years ago, there weren't any bikes at all, especially on the streets. Okay. We will have guards that stop the traffic. So it's safe. There'll be five sets, roughly five guards, stopping in traffic, keeping you safe, helping you if you have a flat tire or whatever. No divvy bikes. You can't rent a bike just like, because they're too heavy, they're too dangerous. But so you need a regular bike. Okay. Amenities. How much are the amenities worth? That's a big example of context transforming how important are these specific propositions. Okay. And what I'm illustrating with this, I did once in the example here, I did say ceteris paribus, if we have smooth markets. But that's the easiest way to do it. But what I'm trying to do, what we try to do in the course, in discussions, well, we may go back and forth, but with a lot of the data in these books, we look for ways of measuring the context and measuring the magnitude of A, B, and C under different contexts and situations. That is, we're trying to avoid making assumptions. Okay. Or if we do, we try then to, is there a way we can begin to at least talk about evidence that would permit it to assess the importance of these. Okay. Any questions on these sort of general points I've been making? Because these contradict what you hear in most in the same classroom by most other people who are here, in fact. Okay. Pretty clear? Okay. Let me gotta plug this minute. That's going to take another minute. I'll sort of start things here. Here's a picture I'll put on the board briefly, but it's on page 32. These are paths which show you class politics. That is, how much of a difference is there between higher status in terms of income and education? Maybe I forget if it's just income or I think it's a two. How much does the context? Whoops. Maybe I didn't bring my cables. Okay, no, so I'll use this book and make up as best I can. Okay, another simple big point for the course. Most of what I've said, I say in each of my books. You can find a one-page summary of the whole book. And I'm going to give you today, for 2 or 3 books, one-page summary of 3 books. That's not to say you don't need to read anything else, but it gives you what's the big picture. And this is an example. And what we'll do in other chapters and other books is something like this. And then we'll often then have something else over here, and maybe something over here. Okay. So the big point of the decline of class, as I illustrated, what's the big point, and how does this fit with our discussion last Wednesday? Marty Lipset and I did another book called The Breakdown of Class Politics. Hint. How do you measure the breakdown of class politics? Yes, go ahead.
People sort of start moving away from being members in trade unions or like identifying themselves through their occupation or through their socioeconomic class, and then they move to affiliating with certain issues. So people move to joining organizations that focus on environmentalist issues or women's issues. shift in concerns as societies grow more individualistic and like there's less of a concern with income.
Okay, yeah, yes, I mean, all that's great. And that's like A, B, C, and D making a difference if we're talking about, say, class voting. But how do we what's a simple, to test that, to test those ideas and to see how strong these are, as well as this path here, it's often good to start with some descriptive, that is, this is more like we can say in statistics, a regression, where you say we have five independent variables, 3, and there's a dependent variable. Before you can do any of that, you have a sense of, what do these variables mean? I mean, how important is income? So, I mean, we use income because it's so widely discussed. You do this because of money. Money, of course money does it. So even if we say, well, amenities may be analogous to money, the question is still where and why and how, or not. And so everything you said is useful, but it's the bigger picture. I'm trying to start at least with a narrower picture. What's class? How can we find a meaningful measure of class? Because this is part of the whole debate of is there a breakdown of class politics or not? Depends on how you define class. I was a student. Most of my professors in grad school were Marxists or former Marxists. Like Adorno, I studied with the leading Frankfurt school in Germany. Adorno and Horkheimer, the classic paper they did was on Hollywood and the capitalist analysis of Hollywood and so forth. So I was exposed to this. And there's another guy here, and it was the leader of teaching in the college here for general education, was a Frankfurt Marxist trained as well. So both of us studied with the same people. But he has a book on basically the Frankfurt School. But both of us agree that as we can see things around us, that amenities are getting more important. People are talking about new regulations such as smoking. And so his example is smokers who are discriminated against, who can't smoke in the classroom, who can't smoke in the hallways, and who have to go way far away from all the majority. This is class conflict, and the poor smokers are a proletariat. That's his book. That's new. So he doesn't say class politics is getting weaker. He's redefining class and away from proletarian occupational conflicts. He's redefining class as including smokers versus non-smokers. Okay, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that if you're clear. I mean, that example is crystal clear. In between him and the person who famously did this was another German name, Ralph Dahrendorf, D-A-H-R-E-N-D-O-R. I'm not going to take the time to write it all out, but basically, he really introduced in a serious way the idea that class is simply he's a political science, he was the director of the London School of Economics for a while. But basically, his big idea was class is any conflict group, and that would include smokers. So there's nothing wrong with that. You can say the same, the father versus the mother versus the children. That can be a class conflict in that sense. But I and Lipset in that debate said that's silly. If you keep redefining the key variables away from what's happening, why don't we keep the Marxist and Weberian definition of class and we measure it in that diagram first? And so we basically use occupation and I can't remember exactly. That is things pretty close to the Marxist definition of proletarian as the definition of class. Okay, if we do that, then and then there are lots of studies that have done that. We took that measure, or we got the data from these multiple countries, and way at the top was Sweden. A little lower was Great Britain, West Germany, France, And way at the bottom, or at the bottom, was the United States. But the United States, and this is 1945. 1945, in the United States, we had 45%. This is called the Alford Index of class voting, ALFORD. Measured this in this way. Class voting in the U.S. was about the same in 1945 and had more class voting than they did in. I guess this was France. I mean France. Okay. A lot of people. I mean everybody based on the headlines think of France as lots of class voting. Okay. But look at the U.S. line drops down to nearly zero class voting. In what year and what did we talk about last Wednesday and why? 1972. Yes, that's the right thing to. That's great. To turn to, you know, where do you find this? I mean, there are parts of the book online. Or you got an ebook copy or something?
I do.
Oh, okay. No, that's great. If as we proceed, maybe I'll mention it. Maybe you can wander around, or you can, well, whatever. What happened in 1972? We talked about it. 4 years before was 1968, and you're in the famous city, which in 1968 was the Chicago Democratic Party primary convention for choosing the presidential candidate in 1972. And who was there in 1972? Daley was the local chairman, and this is 68. 68 was the peak of the urban riots, disturbances, demonstrations all over the United States. I mean, it's the first time ever in the history of the U.S. we had massive burning. You look at the cover of Today, Hamas and all that stuff. It was not as big as that, but in terms of burning, I could look out the window. I'd look out my window, and it looked like Hamas and Israel today. I could see 50 stores burning. Okay. What happened? That was 68. And what did Daley do as mayor of the city of Chicago with all this going on? When there were people out there demonstrating, burning, what did he do? He locked them up. The police were very tough. And all the national television crews were here. And so when there were demonstrators in front of the Democratic Party convention hotel downtown, said, we want to be part of this too. We want to be the people. We want to have egalitarianism. Let us come in and participate as we want to be part of the Democratic Party in its decisions. Daley carried them off. They marched them in paddy wagons. They went to jail, or somewhere far away from there. And many of them then fought back. And so you have, fighting, and then that was on the TV cameras, which is news. Nixon. There's a great opera looking at the art as celebrating this. Nixon in China is a great American opera. Okay, the leading American opera writer. Nixon in China happened in 1972. Okay, how did Nixon get nominated 4 years later? I told you last Wednesday. Maybe if you're not reading, you're forgetting too. That's not so good. 4 years later, the blue-collar contingent was represented by Daley. And Daley and company went to the Democratic Party convention in Florida, and they were not permitted to come in, or they were basically ignored. They were voted down, and McGovern, I think it was McGovern was the candidate. I'm even blocking out his name. I think George McGovern, was unknown political figure, and nobody, especially the blue-collar folks, And the fact that the blue-collar daily folks voted for Richard Nixon, that broke down class politics. Is that clear? Did you not get it on Wednesday but didn't tell us? If you did understand it, why can't you remember it today? Can you remember it in 3 days? Okay, now, question. Is that clear or not? That is what she said, gave a sharper, clear, tell us your name?
Honey.
Okay.
Honey.
Okay. What you did was great. It's subtle and important, but I gave you very crude, simple names and dates and places, which I usually forget and don't care about. That is, I think more about the propositions, to be frank. But nevertheless, but I've simultaneously been doing an oral history of Chicago for decades. And so you can see, and I got a lot of the big ideas from wandering around, riding my bike in Chicago and looking at different neighborhoods and seeing these, hey, class politics, no, it's not happening here. Look at those cars. I'm gonna live in a black neighborhood. These people are supposed to get deemed really poor people. They got Cadillacs all over here. What's happening? Okay, not of all the income is reported. Etc. So, if we push on, the bigger model, if you want to, on page 34, is class politics model for cities and for the world. And the idea, there are 3 columns: traditional stratification hierarchies, which are said high income, high occupation, high education, high status. And then below them, low on all of those. Then major are organized groups, social clubs, civic groups, business groups, chamber of commerce. These mobilize for Republicans, conservatives. On the bottom are trade unions, blue collars, neighborhood groups, padrone and clientelism. And then traditional right, bottom line, fiscally conservative and socially conservative on the traditional right. Traditional left, socially liberal and fiscally liberal. What's wrong with that? I saw it on my biking, this doesn't fit. Something's wrong here. Low income African Americans are, and then you go beyond that. Let's look at what do the surveys say of African Americans say about how much do we want to have high tax, low tax, the same amount of taxes? How do African Americans compare to whites, Caucasians? If we were good Marxists following this kind of approach, and we're having a Chinese example of the bigger state, more socialism, helping egalitarian, shouldn't African Americans favor higher taxes and higher programs that might help them? Is that what they say? No. African Americans are among the lowest. They don't want to pay any taxes. How can you reconcile those answers? And that gets down here. The next picture. There's an emergence of a new political culture. And the cleavages separately operate for fiscal issues in contrast to social issues. That is, in the old model, same kind of thing works for both social and fiscal issues. And so the term neoliberalism makes sense because they follow the same, because social issues are, in a Marxist way, you can say, are driven by the market. Money drives everything in that way, or I won't say everything, but money is the driver, and there's a consistent pattern among both fiscal and social issues. The biggest simple big contribution of this book is to say, hey, no, the dynamics of social issues are in conflict with fiscal issues. that's what we get in the example I give you of I live in Bronzeville. Lived in Bronzeville most of my adult life, and I continually learn more. And the biggest thing I've learned is also diversity. There are lots of different kinds of African Americans. They don't fit, but if you look for simple surveys of the nationally, that's the result that I'm giving you. And so the cleavages are different between social and fiscal issues. And so I don't want to take too much time on this, but basically the book has three now here, this is the other general point I passed over quickly. The idea of a theory, in contrast to giving your mother, Mom, it's because of that. The idea of a coherent theory is deductible. The philosophers of science will say we have a deductible set of propositions. That means you can derive a middle level or a lower level proposition from a more abstract proposition. And that these then, we can try to test them by having operational measures. How can we measure it and test the theory? Okay, that's what good theory should be. Okay, so the book has three general principles. The first and most visible big one is we call the leveling principle. That hierarchy generates anti-hierarchy, and that's like Marx. If we have more income and more disparities among income, among classes and social groups, we should have more mobilized proletariat. We want to have a class consciousness, and that ought to lead to a revolution. Okay, that's consistent with the leveling principle. However, we now add immediately after that another proposition which says the decline of hierarchy sparks a diversity of movements less concerned with hierarchy. Okay, that's pretty abstract. But the simple idea is if everybody gets richer, or if we have less concern with hierarchy, either because everybody gets richer and instead of people starving versus being multimillionaires, if we have more diversity in that sense, this should lead to less concern with hierarchy. In that sense, African Americans, or let's say better example is smokers. Smoking is a social issue. It's not a fiscal issue, basically. And so the question is, how does the simple idea is, if we have less hierarchy, we have an emergence of other issues that are not simply saying down with the hierarchy. And so there are many examples in most cities, most societies. There's a lot about hierarchy, the patriarchy, etc. The multimillionaires, the people who are not the Russian. Okay, what Wagner in Russia was saying. How come these plutocrats don't have your children fighting in the Ukraine war? He's using an egalitarian, normative, generally shared view, even within Russia, but he's showing here's a big violation. The plutocrats are immoral in terms of egalitarian norms. Okay, so if you have so the U.S. may have had in recent years higher income. So if we look over later on in the book, that the income it may have changed, but then with the numbers we have, the U.S. had the highest income, and down at the bottom we had Poland. So Poland was lower in income, but the Poles were much more egalitarian. Okay, so that's the general, the two big hierarchy propositions I'm giving to you. And so then, well, I'll just quickly to give you all three. Second one is the empowerment proposition, that individuals acquire more skills, organizational communication skills. They have iPhones, they talk to each other, they have postcards, they say, let's have a riot, or let's have a demonstration. Let's meet Saturday night at this kind of place, or the Sierra Club will mobilize well because they send out reminders, we need more money, etc. So as we have more of this information based on education, based on time, etc., that tends to lead to more empowerment of groups that are better organized, including political parties. The third are structural conditions that affect general transformation rules, shifting specific rules of the game. Okay, I wrote this before the scenes book, so I didn't use the term scenes, but it fits here perfectly. Structural conditions affect general transformation rules, shifting specific rules of the game. That's pretty awkward. It's easier to say scenes. Okay. All right, so those are the three general propositions here around page 38. But if we go through the rest of the book, they are middle level and then empirical measures of this. So in chapter 2, this that I'm pointing to you to see the discussion. What we had on the board on Wednesday was really the middle level propositions, such as the higher the education of an individual or average level of social unit, such as a country or a city, the greater the support for classic issues of civil rights, civil liberties, and tolerance. Okay, that's proposition 17. So we have about 25 propositions. Just I'm giving you one example to say this is that you can then look at it, and so we try to state these in a way that they may be tested and refuted. And so in the next chapters over here, then we have a chapter of case studies, big case studies, which show, for instance, how it's called, is there really a new political culture? And so we take the biggest single one in the 20th century was the collapse of communism. This happened in 1989. Basically, it's the collapse of the Berlin Wall, when Gorbachev said, you can, if you don't want to have, in East Germany, you can do anything else with the West Germans and so forth. Okay, and that's major. That in turn ended the Cold War, and we have more mixed socialist and private sector market decisions. The Italian political revolution, the whole political party system collapsed in Italy. In Italy, they had Christian Democrats versus communists, basically. Both the Christian Democrats and the communists disappeared. And so I wrote this section with our Italian participants, distilling the best research on this. What happened to the party system in Italy? Very non-intuitive. The end of the Cold War. That is, many upper income and upper status folks were voting for the Christian Democrats because they were afraid that the Russians or the communists would come all the way into Italy, and therefore, even though they didn't, that is, the surveys would show most Italians they go to church, but they don't believe in God. They don't believe in praying and so forth. Afterlife, they don't believe in the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. But they're still a Catholic, Roman Catholic voting country. But as soon as the Berlin Wall went down, it ended. And so what do we have instead? 30 parties in Italy. Okay, so in that sense, I'm choosing huge macro kinds of dramatic changes, in this case global, transforming the local party cleavages, etc. So chapters on Japan, etc. Okay, the next chapter really tests these, and then at the end of that, we list how many of our propositions were supported and not supported. That is, the advantage of laying these things out clearly so we can say how many of these really work or do not work, at least based on the evidence that we have. And so we say, you know, some of these are 60% supported, 80%, some of them are 20% supported. Really, it was wrong. Okay, but when we find something is wrong, learn from your errors and try to go on to something else. And so that's basically what we've done in the later books, which we're going to be reading in this course. When there are things which here don't work, I mean, the biggest thing which I can say is in terms of later on elsewhere, we're sharpening, instead of having these separate issues, we break them up into fiscal versus social, and then later on break up social more and more as these social issues have gotten more and more salient, like diversity, etc., gender, race, and so forth. Those are social issues. They're not fiscal. So, and that's they overlap a little, but they. Okay, let me stop there for a minute. And I can almost 524. I can almost stop there and say I can go over anything else in the next days to go. But I'm asking you, and we can continue this basically this Wednesday, this week. You know, we're going over stuff which is third week. Several things say that is the second week feeds into this, but these ideas which I'm talking about feed into the whole rest of the course in different ways, and and yet they're adding new variables and like so. What I'm trying to say is read some more. I'd love to have you ask questions, but I'll stop here a little earlier than I sometimes do to try to let's discuss. That is what I've given you, the big structure of the propositions of the analysis which I've stressed. And I've said almost nothing about testing. We did a little bit with the class voting as an example. And as you can see, I'll say again another big concept for the course, which you can find in some courses but others not. Multi-methods. We're not saying you must use statistics or you must use national data or you must use only census data, which the demographers do, or some geographers and urban economists. They basically would say we use census data. They want behavioral measures. We don't want any surveys. Or the survey research data, some psychologists will say the opposite. You know, we want to know what people say. We don't care about what. Okay, so. Hand up?
No, sorry.
No, okay. Comments, questions from anybody? How many of you have heard these kinds of big points which I'm laying out? Have you heard in another course anywhere on this campus or anywhere else? Yes, where?
Oh, I've just read about them through the news and the media. I don't think in any course.
No. Yes, that's a very important point. I have learned more, and I wouldn't just say the media, I'm saying the mayors are 10 or 20 years ahead of the social scientists. The mayors are doing these policies. Mayor Daley won a little bit, but Mayor Daley too, really, people make fun of Mayor Daley too because he can't speak the English language properly, you know, Chicago, these guys, and so you talk to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and talk about who are the smartest mayors in the United States, and they would usually, I won't say usually, the great majority, if we take all of them, more than 50% would say Mayor Daley in Chicago. He's a brilliant mayor, but he can't speak the English language, or that is she speaks is I like this call Chicago public school English.
Sorry, I was gonna say the one thing I have learned in another class is. In one of the core courses for the public policy manual, I don't remember what it was with Anthony Fowler, I think. And we discussed how, graphically, how politicians use cleavages to to essentially create a constantly changing political coalitions. That is to, you know, we look at a chart with voters, I'm sure you've seen it, with voters' social and economic scores, and how, for example, as the Democratic Party has become more socially liberal, the Republican Party has maintained that balance by becoming less less fiscally conservative and more socially conservative, etc. So.
Okay, good. So that's one. One person, one, okay, yes.
So at Harris, we're required to take 2 quarters of game theory as part of our core curriculum, and so a lot of what we're talking about in terms of institutional restrictions or how people act within different sources of restraints or motivated by different incentives, is what we've studied in a more formal sense, in a much more mathematical sense as well. But like the general concepts, I think at least like from the doll reading that I remember, like a lot of that was what we had learned in like formal models in the game theory course specifically.
Okay, great. So in that sense, or either the theory there or the social psychologists or psychologists who do experiments where they say, okay, we have mothers with infants, and so then they'll try to say, let's give half of them do this and half of them give, say your baby's crying and your baby's happy. What should you do? I mean, things like that. Those, in a sense, are ways of trying to measure. That is, the game theorists of the theory, the social psychologist, experimental, trying to create empirical, in this sense, contexts or scenes. And so, in that sense, the term scene can be used, as I said, in an awkward level, but it does have parallels, of course. I mean, that's the reason we use the plain old, everyday, widespread term of scène or scene, French. It's used in German. It's the same kind of word, but we're, instead of making it a natural language, commonsensical usage, we're trying to build it into a real theory. Okay, and in this sense. So a lot of the so we have boxes to illustrate the multi-method, and we can think of and look for other ways of doing it. Is we look for cases, look like Nixon, class voting, Daley, Berlin Wall. I mean, these are dramatic individual cases, and then we can try to say, how can we get from the one case to something else, and then why do we also have exceptions? Why do some things, really don't? So Nixon and the 1972 election was a huge exception to having the blue collar voters were voting Republican suddenly and hugely in one election. Look at the boxes is my point. But can we, in these examples, think for yourself? Any time, this is an extension of what I've been saying, another general good point. Whenever you're reading, look for things. Does this fit with your intuitive understanding with what you say with mom? Can I, if you go back Thanksgiving, you talk about what I learned. What did you learn at the University of Chicago? All this tuitions. That's it. Hey, 3 things, Mom. We're ABC. If Mom says, they told you that, they must be wrong. Okay, if Mom or you feels something doesn't fit, let's talk about it. Don't just dismiss it. Don't say that Mom is right or the UofC is right. Maybe we're both right, but the question is where and why, and it's often something about the context or the assumptions, or or it's such as fiscal instead of social. It may be, or if we say, oh, it's different in China. Okay, the question is, why is it different in China? And that's what we're trying to use in this course. Especially we're using China and France because they're very different in terms of the socialist domination in the economy of China, the communist political system, and France with a strong state but having a multi-party, and the symbolism and the arts go way back historically. We're using, and so the rise of the arts is a major issue now globally, and France is the leading country in the world in doing this for hundreds of years. Okay. So, does anyone have an example from what we've talked about and what you've read anywhere in the course so far that conflicts with what seems intuitive for mom or yourself or your friends or people in your dormitory or whatever else, or what I also put in, what's in the New York Times or CNN or in your favorite, and I'm sure you watch very, very different social media sites from your friends in this room. You don't follow just Slate or just one this or that. What are the differences and why? Those are great examples. But that is, sorry. Let me add one more point there. What I'm using implicitly. The normative views that are often ideologically informing different social websites are often the major drivers of what they focus on as news. What we try to do in this course is not to say we want to deny or ignore ideology. We want to try to bring it in and look at some specific propositional statements or the ways that they fit together as an ideology, such as left versus right, progressive, Bernie Sanders, Trump, and say where and why do the views which they have. And so we use those U.S. examples, but we use international examples to say sometimes they don't fit together this way. If we go to China, or if we go to Brazil, or we go to the Philippines, what do they do about drugs in the Philippines? They had a president who had an interesting different solution. Shoot the people. Okay. And what that shows with the trials of Trump, if nothing else, we have one person who wanted to shoot the people, or at least beat them up a little bit. And if he gives, and he really didn't. I mean, I won't mention any evidence, but I'm saying the range of consensus is much narrower in leading the behavior which is acceptable. And what has happened in the last 4, 6+ years, 8, 7 years, is Trump really violated a lot of the rules of the game in the U.S., deliberately attacking. His first statement was, Mexicans are rapists. Wow. I mean, that's totally against the rules of the game in American politics. To use race or national origin of immigrants, and to use violence, rape, so forth. That's a total violation. And so he deliberately, and so did he get away with it? For a while, but look at him right now. He's in jail, etc. That is, there are enough people, including the vice president, including the U.S. Congress, including the other Republicans, did not support Trump on, that is, the institutions, the rules of the game punished him substantially. But we still have roughly 50-50 division in voting. So in that sense, I'm trying to say, think about these if they're in your social media and the people, your friends, and people you're talking to. bring them in, but we don't need to say, who do you like? It's maybe we start with that. Many people say, do you say to your dormitory, do you like this? Do you like the Israelis, or do you like the Ukrainians or the Russians, etc.? The question is not just what do you like, but which aspects lead you to say more, let's do more, let's do less. Just like the moving to North Dakota for paying off your bills or saving the difference that you're, and we found that you you could have earned $200,000. You're still not taking those jobs. Wow. What if we had 300,000 and nobody going to take that job in North Dakota? 300,000, nobody's taking it. Okay. Yes.
To be clear, 100K is allocation.
Your style has become quiet. That is, 20 years ago, 40 years ago at this university, everybody would, I won't say everybody, but half the people would be arguing all the time with me, with themselves, with everybody else. You're listening, I would say, I won't add any labels, but I'm sure you're not all in total agreement with what I'm saying. Or at least, I'm trying, you don't have to say you're wrong, but try to say there's an inconsistency between between this example from growing up in if we go around, let's take usually a pretty easy way to do this. In your high school, did you do this or not? Is your family, for instance, I said a couple of years ago, when the 2016, when Trump was first running, right around Thanksgiving, I said, do you do you talk about Trump in your family over Thanksgiving? And we were saying, yes. I said, can we talk about the issues? Nobody wanted to talk about it. So there are huge differences, and people were very, and I'm sure it's still there right now on this campus for sure. But as you hear, I'm not saying tell people what you like or dislike. How do they fit with these? Well, okay, I'm contingent on. I'm trying to bring out. Let me give you a corollary. How does Trump fit? How does Trump fit with anything that I've said here? Let me add. I'm not supporting this new political culture is good. I try to have examples here, and we'll talk about in the class. Here are lots of disasters which have followed from political leaders doing this. Let me add as well. When I did this book 10 plus years, starting it maybe 15 years ago, this was very new stuff, and nobody talked about this. So it's then become much more established. So with Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, it's clear new political culture, national leaders, Mitterrand in France, the Germans basically moving have moved in this direction. You've then had people, so that in turn has led to the collapse of, as I mentioned, the communists, the traditional left and the traditional right. They've gotten weaker and weaker, and we then have now some extremes, such as the people demonstrating with so Trump. When Trump was running for election, did he say, I need to have big contributions from the General Motors or from Wall Street? No, he attacked Hillary Clinton, his main candidate. Hillary Clinton is corrupt Hillary. She's taking that money from Wall Street. That's what normally would be said about the Republicans. So he was applying it to her. But one, but two, he was then often, as people would say, you know, so how did he get elected? He used Twitter. All these little things. Okay, did they fit with a party program? No, he didn't. Were they consistent with what he said? Is the first line consistent with the second line of his Twitter notes? No, he'd contradict himself in the same thing, and he didn't care about it. Okay, so I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm simply pointing out this is the rise in terms of Dahl's label, the rise of issue politics. This is issue specificity, not political party driven or voting. It is issue politics gone wild. And Trump pushed it a whole lot further than Dahl. Dahl began it. I pushed it further, and Trump has gone wild. And now it's happening. That is, we now have many positions of different kinds of people. So for the examples with France of Macron, and then of the far right, anti-far right was the label used there. The racism moving from the far racist father to the daughter becoming centrist and trying to win the next election by beating Macron, by being more centrist than he, in choosing specific examples like Margaret Thatcher choosing lower status women who were against nuclear energy. We are at the end of the hour. We will have our office hours. Anybody wants to talk a little more? And try to don't be afraid. You can frame anything. I mean, you can say you don't have to be polite, which you can't be. You can politely say anything, and you can shout if you want. And that can show the emotion or the feelings as well, or just point out the feelings, the power of those feelings based on evidence that you can see from other people do. It don't have to be what you feel or say yourself. Okay. Onward on Wednesday, and let's try to have more discussion with you leading more. Okay. Thank you for your good points. Can I talk to you for a minute? Let's see that. I mean, I can talk to you a fair amount, but let me take a look at this for a minute, and then sure.
I just had a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
So, we're going to come up with special. Do I just post it on campus?
So that
The memos?
number, yeah.
Just post on campus? Okay. On the discussion board or just?
Yes, yeah, well, yeah, I said, I should, let me say it on Wednesday, but follow the syllabus, don't look, and Canvas is a mess.
Okay.
Canvas is messy, things are in the wrong order, they're not labeled, and some of it is old and so forth. Look at the syllabus in terms of the order of the readings and the stars. It's right, and I'll try to follow this.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay?